Good morning. My name is Dale McKeel, and welcome to this session on the Triangle Bikeway study. As it says on the bottom of this slide, the Triangle Bikeway study is being jointly funded by the Durham Chapel Hill Carborough MPO and the CAMPO, the Capital Area MPO. So I work with the Durham Chapel Hill Carborough MPO, which covers all of Durham County, most of Orange County, and the northern part of Chatham County. And we have jointly funded this program with the Capital Area MPO. Even though there are two MPOs that cover the Triangle area, we do work jointly on many projects, including this study. So I'm going to turn it over to my counterpart at Campo, Kenneth Withrow.
Thank you, Dale. And again, good morning to everyone. Just to give you an orientation with regard to the Triangle Bikeway as it's currently named, the initial concept was originated in the early 2000s. This was during the process in which we were creating and eventually adopted the Capital Area MPO's first bicycle and pedestrian plan, which occurred on March 19th of 2003. And the thought behind it was, how do we connect Raleigh to RTP and Durham? Fast forward to 2016, Wake County began the process or was developing the countywide Greenway system plan. And during the process of developing that plan, over 2,000 residents and over 50 stakeholders involving the local governments, various interested jurisdiction, developers, and regional and state agencies, as well as advocacy groups, had expressed and were part of that process and identified a need to better develop regional connectivity between greenways and jurisdictions and the various destinations. One of the outcomes, or one of the elements that was being discussed during that time, was the idea of a bikeway along I-40 connecting Raleigh and Research Triangle Park. So since the system plan was already in its development stage, there was discussion by the project staff and others in leadership to see if we can have that incorporated into the plan. The idea was presented at a TJCOG, or Triangle Council of Government regional meeting back in February of 2017. It was also presented at our annual Triangle Bicycle Pedestrian Workshop in April of 2017. With the input that we received, the Capital Area MPO and Wake County went ahead and proceeded to have a feasibility study done to look and have that incorporated as a logical extension of the Wake County Greenway System Plan. After we had meetings in terms of creating that feasibility study, we met with various stakeholders, jurisdictional representatives, to look at the opportunities and constraints for creating a future alignment. And due to the positive feedback that we had received with regard to this, Wake County incorporated this study into their plan and began applying for funding for initial connections that could be improved over time. And over the course of 2017, the project changed its name and was rebranded from the I-40 Bikeway to the Triangle Bikeway. And the project parameters, of course, are looking at including or developing a bikeway length from Raleigh. One of the nexus points we were looking at was the North Carolina Museum of Art via I-40 up to Research Triangle Park, and then from there carrying the bikeway to along NC 54 in that general area to US 15501 in Chapel Hill. So without further ado, as Dale has mentioned, we have included it in our UPWP plans, and Iona Thomas with McAdams and her team will go ahead and begin the presentation.
Thanks, Dale. Thanks, Kenneth. And we're excited to be here today. I wanted to introduce Graham Bruns and Eric Melville on our project team. They are very instrumental in keeping this project going in the right direction. So I appreciate all of their hard work. So we'll jump into it. I always kind of like to get people started off by thinking about what type of cyclist they are. Many of you are familiar with Roger Geller's research from Portland and the breakdown of cyclists between that strong and fearless, less than 1%, enthusiastic and confident, 7%, and then this big quadrant here of interested but concerned, over 60% put themselves in this category. And Roger says, riding a bike should not require bravery. Yet all too often, that is the perception among cyclists and non-cyclists alike. So this is an important foundational kind of philosophy behind this study, is that we want to listen to the community and provide them with facilities that meet their needs and not skew towards small percentages of folks who don't really represent the more majority of people when it comes to their confidence and level of bravery when it comes to cycling. So into the study itself, this is a roughly 17-mile long corridor from RTP going to the east, what you see in yellow there. There has been, as Kenneth mentioned, some work done on that section of the trail. Alta did a good study that looked at a variety of different options. We'll be validating those alternatives, adding a couple more to those, and then modeling each of them so that we can make a recommendation about cost, safety, design considerations, come up with a selected alternative that we then mature to a 30% design. From RTP going to the west, what you see in pink there, that section of the study, there has not been any feasibility work done on that section of the project yet. So on that section, we are developing alternatives from scratch and then completing feasibility analysis on each of those alternatives, ultimately recommending a preferred alternative, but then that would need to be taken further into design at a later date. It's important to understand also about this section of the project is that regardless of the recommended alternative, we will be looking at the NC 54 corridor. There are quite a few ongoing projects at the NCDOT and the local level on NC 54, as well as some development projects. And we'll be making recommendations for bike ped facilities along that corridor, again, regardless of the alternative that we recommend to move forward. As you're thinking about I-40, I'd like you to think about I-40 of the future, not so much as it is today. Today, it is very, very loud, and there's a lot of exhaust. It's a dirty corridor, but there are a couple of disruptive technologies that are going to make some changes to that in the not so far term horizon. So when we look at the percentages of pure internal combustion engines, we see this trend line moving fairly quickly away from internal combustion engines. Now that probably isn't going to have a dramatic impact on the noise in the corridor because wheel noise at high speeds is louder than engine noise, but it will make it a much cleaner corridor. And we do know that some of the heaviest fleet vehicles will be some of the first and the large proportion of vehicles that will be going to full electric vehicles. So we expect that the corridor will become cleaner in the not too distant future. The other disruptive technology that's coming online that's very exciting for the cycling community and for communities in general is the advent of e-bikes or electric assist bikes. We see a huge growth in the number of e-bikes all across the world. We are catching up. We're a little bit behind. There are a lot more of them in the rest of the world than they are here, but they are becoming more and more popular. And we also expect that the trend line on e-bike prices will be coming down. And so what does that mean for a corridor like this? For a long time, distance cycling has really been the domain of very, very fit and very brave people. And if we can marry up tools like e-bikes with separated facilities, that opens up a commuter facility like this to a lot more people, where it really becomes an option to make a longer distance trip with a little assist from your e-bike to use that to go to work a couple of times a week on this corridor. So tuck that in the back of your mind that this corridor is going to be changing, and then also distance cycling is already changing. This is our schedule. We are moving into the end of 2020. We are wrapping up both our existing conditions documentation and field work, and then we're also wrapping up our public input process. We will come back out to the public for a public comment process in the late spring of 2021. And that will be once we have alternatives developed, and we'll be soliciting input on those alternatives from the public. Our community engagement program has 4 foundational elements that will run throughout the life of the project. And the first is a high concentration on effective jurisdictional coordination. We have 5 different jurisdictions on the corridor, and we've had in-depth jurisdictional meetings with them, not just with one department representing a whole town or city, but rather meeting with their public works, their transportation, their planning, parks and recreation, utilities, economic development, all of those different groups within a town or city that could be touched or influenced or have an influence or a policy related to this project. We've had all of those meetings, and a lot of those folks from within those towns and cities are participating in our working group meetings that happen once every 2 months. And so we're very lucky to have that level of engagement this early in the study. We on this corridor have a lot of heavy hitter stakeholders. So our stakeholder engagement is also equally important. We have NCDOT, who we are hoping will be a true partner on this project, and so far certainly has been. NC State Parks, RDU Airport, RTP, North Carolina Railroad, Go Triangle, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Wildlife Resources Commission, just to name a few. We also have Duke Energy, of course. So lots of heavy hitters, lots of different policies and procedures and coordination efforts to make sure that we are complying with. Ultimately, we want to understand each stakeholder's position with regard to this project as early as we can, so that if there is collaboration or negotiation to be done, we understand where they're starting from. Thirdly, we are committed throughout the life of this project to engaging voices who have been historically excluded or neglected from planning projects like this. I'm going to talk a little bit more in just a bit about some of our strategies around equity and making sure that all voices in each of our communities is represented in this study. And then, of course, being adaptive during COVID-19. We got notice to proceed almost at the same time that the pandemic was shutting everything down. So our public engagement scope looks nothing like what we're actually doing. And we have revised our approach so that we are not putting any staff or the public into any risky situations, but at the same time, making sure redoubling our efforts to make sure that we are reaching deeply into each community. We have a website that I hope most of you have already visited, trianglebikeway.com. There are 4 different portals once you get into the website. So this first is resources and events, where you can go to find out updates about the project. We'll also have some on-demand recordings of presentations there. We have a survey here in the Help Shape the Plan tab. If you haven't taken the MetroQuest survey, please do so. We would love your input, and particularly if you live here in the Triangle. And then we have a crowdsourced map. This is a place where the public and jurisdictional stakeholders can go in and make discrete comments about the project. So you can leave a line or a point comment. A line could be a route or an alternative that you would like to see or avoid. A point could be letting us know about an intersection that needs particular attention. Once you go to close and save your comment, a comment form will pop up there. And we do ask that you provide context for your geographic or spatial node. We want to understand why is that a good route? Why is that a bad route? Why should this intersection be avoided or improved? So do leave us as much context as you can. And then case studies. We have done quite a bit of work on case studies, and I'm going to share some of those with you right now. So we do not have in this region a similar project. So we felt it was important to go out into the country to look at communities who have put facilities like this on the ground. So facilities in or near highway right-of-way corridors, so that we can understand timelines, how long it took them to get their projects on the ground, how they address different challenges, if they came up with innovative design solutions for things like how to deal with interchanges, how they funded their projects. And then given the regional nature of our project, we were specifically curious about partnerships and collaboration and how different communities leverage partnerships to advance their project. So we'll dig into the case studies. The first one is Path 400 in Atlanta. And this project is 5.2 miles long. It's about to grow to over 8 miles long. They have received federal funding to continue the project for another 3 miles. What's interesting about this section that's on the ground now is that it was funded totally with local dollars, so local sales tax and some state funding. The federal grants are for the future projects, not the section that is on the ground. So it is 2/3 of the way within the GDOT right-of-way and cost about $28 million. And the ribbon was finally cut on it in 2020. Some photos of Path 400. That photo up on the left-hand corner there, you can see the MARTA train going through there. The relationship of transit to these facilities was something that we heard a lot about in developing each of these case studies. Communities wanted to be able to weave together biking and walking and transit facilities in a way that people can legitimately make regular trips using these facilities. The Custis Trail in Northern Virginia, I suspect many of you have heard about this or even spent some time on it. This is a great lesson in the efficiencies of building biped facilities when you build your highway facility. So in other words, complete streets. This project was constructed as part of the original I-66 project. So it has been on the ground as long as I-66 has been on the ground. And it is 100% within the Virginia DOT right-of-way. It only cost $2.5 million. which even if you escalate that up to today dollars, is a very cost efficient bike ped facility. I'll draw your attention to the lighting on this project. I lived in DC for about 10 years and worked for the Pentagon, and I knew a lot of folks who use this facility. This time of year when the days are short, there are a lot of people using this facility at dusk and at dark. And so the Custis Trail does have lighting, and you'll see that on a couple of these different projects that the true commuter type facilities do include lighting. The two pictures where you see traffic cones and other safety devices there, those are some extensions, separated facilities that have been created that go right into Roslyn. The I-90 trail in Seattle, this is about 10 miles of trail that was constructed in the 1990s. It is 100% in the Washington DOT right-of-way, and it's part of the Mountains to Sound Greenway. Very highly used facility. And if you look in the red box here, this section, they're having to go back and complete and do some rework on this section to get that back into service. And this project, like I said, very, very highly used. It's been on the ground for a long time and is just a part of the way people make their way around the Seattle region. The US 36 Bikeway, this goes from Denver to Boulder. This is probably the most analogous project to our project. It's 18 miles long, and it was finished in 2016. It is 100% in the CDOT right away and cost about $16 million. You can really see here on the map to the right of your screen here, how they have braided together commuter rail, bus rapid transit, and the bike facility to, again, provide those options so that non-vehicular trips are a realistic option for a large amount of people in this region. This is what that project looks like. A little bit different topography and landscape from what we have here in the Triangle. But as you can see, it's in the CDOT right away. Very popular trail. Usage on this trail is going up and up. They've got some different temperature challenges than we do. So you can see their entire trail is made out of concrete to deal with the freeze and thaw contractions. The Charter Oak Greenway is another long corridor. It's 16 miles long and connects East Hartford, Connecticut, east over towards Bolton and through Manchester. $29 million. Again, this project is about 2/3 of the way in Connecticut DOT right away. And this project has been really completed in multiple different phases. And so there's kind of been a postage stamp as they can get federal funds, grants approved, and moving forward, they've built out this project and it will also continue to grow. It is part of the East Coast Greenway. And so that's a nice little section of trail here. And this is what some of that looks like. They do, the trail does cross over the highway a couple of times. And they've got some very new sections of facility on the ground. The Columbia River State Trail in Oregon is 22 miles long and is an example of repurposing a vestigial highway and saving that space for biking and walking. This project has a huge price tag of $144 million, but that is because it has sections that include tunnels and huge retaining walls. And so it is a very expensive project, but it is going to be a big part of the Columbia River Gorge and the National Scenic Area This was largely funded with federal grants and is again 100% within the Oregon DOT right-of-way. We do have a North Carolina precedent that we're excited has come online. I-40 Business in Winston-Salem is a collaboration between Winston-Salem and NCDOT. When NCDOT reached out to Winston-Salem about beginning the Business 40 improvements, the Winston-Salem Council created the Creative Corridors Coalition and charged that coalition with working with the department to make sure that the aesthetic vision for the corridor was achieved, and also the bike and pedestrian circulation vision for how downtown Winston-Salem was going to develop over time. This facility connects Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center, which is one of the largest employers, with the rest of downtown, including the ballpark, and then shopping and restaurants and other destinations in the downtown area. This has a huge price tag for 1.2 miles of trail, but that is because there are two pretty high-profile signature bike ped bridges over the facility. And so most of that price tag is taken up with those structure costs. It is exciting though, because it's 100% in the NCDOT right-of-way. So we have a nice precedent here in North Carolina. We also have a precedent in Raleigh with the House Creek Greenway. This facility is 100% outside of the NCDOT right-of-way, but follows the 440 corridor and makes important connections between Meredith College, North Carolina Museum of Art, and then up to the Crabtree Creek Greenway. This was funded through the local open space and greenways bonds, which were very successful in 2003 and 2007. The price tag here was back in the good old days when we could build greenway for $1 million a mile. So before the construction market had recovered from the recession, which really kind of kicked in 2014. So I would expect that this project would be significantly more expensive if we built it today. So our survey, I'm going to give you a sneak peek. Our survey is still open. It closes on November 15th. So if you haven't taken the survey, if you live here in the Triangle and you haven't taken the survey, please take a few minutes to take it. And we would also love for you to share it with your networks here in the Triangle so we can get some good input. So we kicked off the survey back in early August. So far we have over 2,000 respondents. And some of the key takeaways is we've got very good representation for all of the zip codes along the corridor. And we have a good mix of people who live in the corridor and those who work in the corridor and or both. We have a very strong preference for separated facilities, which is very consistent with what we see around the country. And then surprisingly, 67% of respondents would use the facility weekly, which is exciting. We do have some gaps when we look at the corridor demographics and the survey respondent demographics. So in order to cultivate some additional conversations with Black, Hispanic, Asian folks who use buses and lower and modest income folks, we are hosting a series of focus group discussions. The 9th, and I think we've actually extended this date beyond the 13th. The election has kind of sucked all the air out of the room and everyone's attention. So we're going to have some of these beyond the 13th. But if you go to our website, trianglebikeway.com, and click on that events page, all the information you need to sign up to participate if you fall into one of these categories or are connected with someone, all the information for them to participate is on that website. So I mentioned the 67% of folks who would use the facility at least weekly, and this is how that breaks down. Small number of folks twice daily, a little bit more daily, and then the largest respondent group is 2 to 3 times a week, and that is over 600 respondents are saying they would use it 2 to 3 times a week. And then also almost 300 saying once per week. So very strong kind of latent demand that we're seeing. Now, again, this is an anecdotal survey. This is not a statistically valid survey. So these are folks who are interested in cycling and bike ped facilities, probably to begin with. And so they are self-selecting to participate in the study. So it is skewing towards being favorable, but good data points nonetheless. Facility preference, we asked respondents to rate their preference for facilities, 1 star being the least preferred, 5 stars being the most preferred. You can see Greenway here, by far the strongest respondents here with 85% making that their preferred facility type, with a side path. Side paths being those facilities that follow surface streets. Excuse me. So these are facilities that are located and follow along a surface street. They're located behind a curb, so there's a physical separation between vehicle traffic with that curb. Ideally, there is a vegetated buffer to give people a little bit of room. And then, of course, at each intersection that road goes through, side paths also make their way through those intersections as well. We also asked about preferences for on-road facilities, wide shoulders, obviously being the least, well, I say obviously, in my point of view, obviously, being the least preferred, where there is no discrete space for cyclists. And then bike lanes where we have a space dedicated to cyclists that is separated by that strip of paint. Buffered bike lanes where we are using paint to create more distance between the bike traffic and the vehicular traffic. And then protected bike lanes where we are using some method, and there are a lot of different methods that we can use. We can use parked cars, we can use monolithic medians, we can use anchored planters, lots of different ways to create a physical separation so people are not sharing the same space and there's physical protection between them and the vehicle traffic. You can see we get kind of mixed results here, definitely more favorable the more protected the facility gets, but they're kind of bouncing around a little bit. We asked a question about how people wanted to be in terms of proximity to I-40 itself. And this was a question in the survey that in hindsight, I think we could have done a better job providing some context around this. We have since held 2 public workshops and did an exercise to get more information about this. And we're actually going to walk through this exercise with you all today and have a peer discussion around this issue. So what we're trying to get at is preference for whether the facility is running along the highway corridor itself, or if it's making its way on parallel streets. So these would be side paths that, again, run along parallel streets, but they're not directly in the I-40 corridor. You can see here we get some mixed. It's hard to tease out clear guidance here. And so that's why when we went out to the public last week, this was specifically what we were asking them about. So when we look at the pros and cons for routing along parallel streets, you can see here in pink, these are the different alternatives that we have mapped out. So some of the positives here that we do have more routing options available to us. There's potentially less noise and exhaust. We do have lower vehicle speeds and lower traffic volumes. And then one of the most compelling things that we heard were that people liked that there were more connections sorry, my dog is barking. Connections directly to destinations. So you connect directly to shopping or places of employment, schools, libraries, those kinds of things with these alternatives. Some of the cons is that we will potentially have many more property and easement to negotiate with. There are more crossing conflicts on each of these different alternatives, so more at-grade crossings. This is a less direct route, so wayfinding and branding of the facility will be more challenging. Some of these are quite narrow, tight right-of-ways, and so those can present challenges. And then given the nature of doing these projects one section at a time, it could lengthen the overall schedule for getting the project complete. There is a huge opportunity with NCDOT's revised complete streets policy to include bike ped facilities in future NCDOT projects. So with the complete streets policy revision, NCDOT has said that they are committed to building complete streets that provide for multimodal options through these corridors. So that includes the planning, the design, the right-of-way acquisition, the construction, and maintenance. So fully accepting responsibility for the needs of that facility. This, the coordination around this is what would lead to some of the schedules being lengthened out, because you, at this point, with this option, would be waiting for those projects to get ranked and progressed through the TIP. At this point, we think the cost would be fairly similar between the two different options. When we look at the I-40 corridor, we have fewer crossing conflicts, fewer at-grade crossings. Some of those conflicts could be potentially more complex in the design side, but we have fewer of them to deal with. This would be a very direct route, and it would be a pretty highly visible, iconic facility. So if you imagine you fly into RDU Airport and you leave the airport and get on I-40 to go east to Raleigh or west to Durham and Chapel Hill, and you look over and you see lots of people riding their bikes and walking and running on a bike ped facility in our highway corridor. That tells you a lot about our community and the values of our community before you've even arrived at your destination when you visit Raleigh-Durham. The schedule on this could be faster, and that's a very strong could. If NCDOT, if we're able to carve out sections that NCDOT is okay, that makes it that we're only dealing with one property owner. And so going for big federal grants and having that control of right-of-way could speed the project up. Some of the cons, there's a lot of competition for the I-40 right-of-way in terms of how that right-of-way gets used in the future. So that is a big challenge. We talked about the noise and exhaust. Those are real concerns for folks. And then this lacks direct connections to destinations. So these options would be tying into each jurisdiction's existing networks, and you'd be relying on those networks to complete your trip. Cost at this point, we think fairly similar. And then the opportunity really is an exciting partnership with NCDOT. NCDOT under Julie's leadership has really seen a lot of change in terms of the commitment to multimodal facilities and choice here in the state. So everything that we see from the department says that a project like this is something that we could potentially partner on in a successful way. So if you take a look down in your chat box, there's a link there called Concept Board. And if you click on that link and then select Guest Access, we're going to have a little interactive peer discussion. And then you can select a Post-it note. You could also draw on any of the maps that you see there. As we go, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let Eric go over. One thing I forgot to mention is that very likely the facility will be a combination of these two different options. So if we zoom in, Eric, on the map on the bottom there, as we think about it, there is nothing that says that we have to be, that this has to be a binary choice between I-40 and the parallel routes. So it can be a mix and match of the two options. So we would love to get some comments. If you're not familiar with Concept Board, the toolbar is usually up there on the top. Sometimes it's on the bottom, but you can use the hand tool to move around. You can draw, there's a highlighter button. So if you want to go down to this map and draw a combination of routes that you would like to see. And then Eric, if you can zoom back up so we can see we would love to get your comments on these. Oh, look at how many names there are. That's so awesome. We would love to get your thoughts. Just select a Post-it up there and drop that down and let us know what your thoughts are on either of these options. And as some of those Post-it notes come online, I'll share those with the group. So we did have a question or a comment that's related to this discussion. Bike commuters care about travel time too. How about main facility stays on the interstate corridor, but has good interchange-like connections to side arteries for focus to origins and destinations? That sounds awesome. And then we had a question wondering, and we would love to hear the answer to this. I wonder if anyone in the session today can name an interstate or toll road project that has an adaptive project like this. And then Mark Schultz had a question about the competition for the I-40 right-of-way. So NCDOT has different projects looking at widening projects to deal with traffic and capacity. There's also discussion of, we have bus on shoulder, a lot of different transit options that are looking at the corridor as well. And then had a question, how do I join the board? If you look in the chat, if you open the chat, there is a link that says Concept Board. Just click on that link and then check. Good. Eric just put it back in there. Once you click on that link, choose guest. And I'm going to go in and read some of these. Oh, I have to go to my concept board. All right.
Yeah, and Iona, I can read off some of these questions that we had earlier in the presentation if you want.
Yeah, that would be great.
And I know some of these we haven't got to the level of detail that we probably want for a lot of these, but for the panelists, will the bikeway be designated for night use? And then with that, are industrial path lights that are black dark night or black dark sky being looked at for that?
So we are not looking at specific lighting technologies. I think the case studies pretty strongly show us that if this is going to truly be a bike ped commuting facility, that that lights are appropriate. So I would suspect that the recommendation would be that lights would be included in the facility. All right, so I'm going to read a couple of these. I prefer using parallel routes to avoid the noise and exhaust. It might help attract those riders who feel less brave about riding, as it is a calmer experience and might attract more local traffic. I think connecting more destinations is a higher priority because it would encourage more shorter non-motorized trips, which more people are likely to take. And that's a really great point about this facility, is that yes, this facility has a long distance function for the region, but it also, the majority of the trips will be much shorter trips within communities. So we're really trying to make sure that it serves both the long distance needs of the region and the internal needs of each community that it serves as well. So great point there. The visibility to non-cyclists and visitors to the region will make a marketing a path that is protected along the interstate. So liking that. I like the idea of the visibility of a route next to the highway, especially when there's heavy traffic, and shows people that there is alternatives to sitting in cars and stopping and going. Yeah, I think that we all love that idea of us zooming past people who are sitting in traffic. Are we sure that air quality is worse on the interstate? Good question, Ruben. If I'm biking closer to slow traffic on local roads, the fumes are likely bad compared to a path in the interstate corridor offset further from traffic. So we do have, and I think that that's true, is that we have to deal with exhaust in either option. We do have a recreational facility that is right along this corridor. So at Crabtree Creek, there are single track mountain bike trails and running trails back there. I run back there pretty often. And sometimes the exhaust is pretty intense and you don't want to be exercising in it. So I think it's the concentration on the interstate corridor. And we will be looking into and doing some research on the exhaust to include in the study. So when we come back with alternatives, we'll be able to, in the decision matrix, provide more context about that. I think having a trail along an existing interstate right-of-way can help those visiting the area easily understand a trail route. This would additionally help provide gaps in commuter routes, maybe promotion in conjunction with transit and microtransit. Cool. Let's see. The House Creek Trail is far enough away from the interstate for sure. How will this compare? So the House Creek Trail, that example, like I said, is entirely outside of the NCDOT right-of-way. So that option relies on being able to acquire right-of-way from adjacent property owners. And so we do have alternatives that we'll be looking at that fall into that category, that follow the House Creek model. Having a trail next to the interstate advertises the trail to drivers as a nice alternative. Let's see. Another comment from Ruben. Hi, Ruben. I haven't been on the Swamp Rabbit Trail in Greenville, South Carolina, but I hear that the connections to businesses are excellent. I've biked all of the Neuse River Trail, more south than north, except for a few high-end subdivisions. There is not much connection to adjoining land uses. Yeah, that is certainly an issue. So for Raleigh, because their network is almost entirely along stream corridors, and those are literally at a different elevation from the rest of the city. That has led to a lot of kind of disconnect between the network and destinations that are directly adjacent. So that definitely is a challenge. I think if you're following the current update to the Greenway Master Plan, we're looking at some trail-oriented development that could go into the UDO. And then we also, I think when you move away from a recreation-only type network towards a merged network that serves both transportation and recreation needs, you get more opportunities to connect to destinations. Allison says Swamp Rabbit is fantastic for business connections between multiple jurisdictions. So we can definitely look at Swamp Rabbit as a model. Parallel streets would likely be more accessible to invisible users who are likely to be making shorter trips.
I don't know. There's still a few questions in the chat box that.
Yeah, that would be great if you can go ahead and read them
out. There's a few questions about trail design and features, about the width of the trail, as well as whether or not there's going to be stations to lock up bikes, particularly e-bikes, or near some of these destinations.
So we are developing the alternatives now. So that will also include developing typical section alternatives. One thing that we've heard very clearly from each of the jurisdictions we've been working with is that the facility really needs to potentially look at branding a more inclusive brand. So it isn't just a Bikeway. So yes, it serves this important commuter function, but it also needs to be open to people who are biking and running and not making long distance bike trips. So that has led to some discussions about whether the facility would separate the bike traffic from the pedestrian traffic, which has implications for the recommended typical section. So in answer to your question, we have not settled on a typical section, and that will be part of the alternative analysis and selection. So we'll be making recommendations and asking for comments on alternatives and typical sections as well.
There's another question about community engagement. It asks, has the Affordable Housing Office Department been engaged in the conversations?
I didn't hear, I'm trying to find the question.
It's up at the top.
Mhm.
And it says, has Affordable Housing Office or Department been engaged in the conversations?
I'm not sure. I know that we have engaged each of the planning departments in each of the jurisdictions. And we kind of left it up to each community how they populated those meetings. But we can circle back and make sure that we are looping them in and that they are invited to the working group meetings.
And then there's another question about connections to RDU. Have we considered having extensions to RDU and discussions with them about adding bike storage facilities?
So the RDU connection is really important. And that also reminds me that the Go Triangle Regional Station is a very important kind of nexus point for the facility. So we'll be working with Go Triangle, and when the location of that regional station settles down, we're going to make sure that this facility ties directly into that station. So that's one piece of what's happening in RTP there. RTP has a plan, and we're working with them. They have invested in some planning around upgrading their network. So we will be working with them to connect in the best way into their existing and planned improvements to their network. In terms of amenities, we did learn a really valuable lesson in Raleigh with some of our larger projects. We were so focused on getting the facility on the ground that we didn't think about, and we didn't have any money to look at amenities. So drinking water, rest areas, storage areas. And so I think when we get to the alternative development phase, we will be making sure that we're making recommendations for what appropriate facilities. We also have developed relationships with each of these case studies and can reach out to them for some of their best practices around potable water, storage, rest. I think also for us, shade is a big issue. So that's on our to-do list.
A lot of really good questions. Another one asked about whether or not there's going to be a need for NEPA review if the corridor is within NCDOT right away.
Yeah, and I can barely hear you for some reason. If we do receive federal money for the project, there is a requirement that we complete NEPA documentation on the project. Which level of documentation that is would be determined if it's a PCE, a CE, an EA FONSI. That would be determined at the time that the project is going through the process of design. Right now, we're only taking the eastern section up to a 30% conceptual design and recommending an alternative on the western section. So this process does not include any NEPA evaluation.
There's another question about ADA accessibility, whether or not those considerations are being included.
Yes, this project would most certainly comply with ADA.
Sorry, there's a lot of questions.
Yeah. Oh, there was a question too about trail width. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, We talked a little bit about the typical section, that is part of the ongoing evaluation, and we'll be looking at things like whether we separate the bicycle traffic from the walking and non-wheeled traffic. And we'll also be looking at what the physical constraints are of the different options. And so I would imagine that the typical section for something in the I-40 corridor might look quite different from the typical section for a side path along one of the parallel streets.
Another question about community engagement. It says, are the decision makers open to historically underengaged residents saying no or slow down or only after safety improvements in our neighborhoods?
I'm just having trouble hearing you, Eric. Let me try to find that question. Gosh, there are a lot of questions.
Absolutely, Iona. This is Terry. I just want to touch base. Yeah, there are a lot of questions in there. So if you can find this last question, we'll go ahead and wrap up this session.
Okay, let's see. Let me find a good question. Okay, I found the question that Eric was asking. Are the decision makers open to historically underengaged residents saying no or slow down or only after safety improvements in our neighborhood? I would say certainly yes. And we've had a question that has come up about prioritization and how this project would fit into communities prioritizing how they spend money. And this project, the scope of this project isn't really is not looking at all how this, particularly how different communities would invest in their bike ped. So the purpose of this study is to provide communities with enough information for them and their residents to make a good decision about whether this option is something that should be pursued for their community. So this truly is a feasibility study where the goal is each community and the region making good decisions and doing their own prioritization. And so that question really comes back into each community being willing to engage with their and listen to their residents.
Iona, Eric, Graham, thanks very much for this presentation today. It's been really fantastic and a powerful project for the state of North Carolina. I want to thank you all for being here today at the 2020 Bike Walk North Carolina Summit, and we'll be sure to share this chat box with you as well, so you can follow up on some of these questions. But
that was my next question was, can we have a copy of this chat?
Really amazing stuff today. Thanks very much for being here.
Thanks. It's a great conference, and just thank you so much for including us. Have a great day.
Yeah, thanks everyone.